Boss Brief, a strategic guide on how not to be an asshole at work. You'll learn about bad bosses, how they can be detected and handled, as well as how to tell if you happen to be one. Join an executive and an executive coach, both artists working in marketing and advertising from over 2 decades, who are here to offer you the ultimate guide on how to navigate any employment landscape. Here are your hosts, Eugene S. Robinson and Stephanie Peirolo.
Welcome to the Bad Boss Brief. I am Stephanie Peirolo.
I'm Eugene S. Robinson.
And we had a show planned for today and we scrapped it. So we are going to do a show today called Grief at Work. Do you want to tell us why I thought it was a good idea to do this show this week?
Yeah, I got a call Tuesday from my sister that my father is dead. But before you start extending condolences, know that he was a horrible father. So I don't have any confused feelings about his passing, except to note that he's passed. And this gave us the occasion to come up with, presumably, if you have a father who you actually love, what does that do to the workplace dynamic? And of course, I had the ultimate bad boss who suggested that if somebody you care about dies, just send flowers and get back to your work.
Wow.
So, yeah. And this came to a head right as we were about to have a weekend retreat, which were mandatory. And you were mandatory. Yes, you had to attend them. And somebody had said my grandmother had died. And he said, send flowers. I expect to see you at the meeting. And so in the breakaway session, this person was an executive staffer was in my breakout room and began sobbing. So this is what I had to carry back to him in a private off-board session. And his response was completely unsympathetic, unsurprisingly.
Well, and I think what seemed interesting to me is that there's a lot of ways in which grief impinges in the work world and many people who are not prepared in any way to deal with it. Right. And so one of the things, and we are going to talk about, you wrote a really excellent Substack. You want to say that we never talk about our Substacks, although sometimes we'll have little buttons. You want to say what your Substack is?
It's called, the Substack in total is called Look What You Made Me Do. And it should be noted, before Taylor Swift got to that same title, and which is hard to convince people of now, of course. And the piece that you're referencing is called Father, the Final Installment, which there's a lot of dark humor in it because, we've talked once since I turned 20. For the record, I am 61. So that gives you an idea of the extent of the quality of our relationship. So, but yeah, that's where you can find it. And I kept thinking, I'm going to write about Hamas because our topic was, politics this week. And I'm going to write about the situation in the Middle East. And then I said, well, it's usually what obsesses me that week. And nothing, give him that. I was obsessed with both the response to my response and in general, the response to grief and how people process it and what they expect to do with it. I mean, there were only 2 people I spoke to that I cared about couching what I was saying. And one was my sister, who called me and told me, though she's estranged from him as well and has not seen him for 25 years. And my mother, who remembers a very different man. Of course, this is a man she married and chose to have a child with. That's me. And she was torn apart by it. So my insensitivity had to be curbed in dealing with my mother. And I was mindful of all of that when I was writing the piece. So it was a delicate needle to thread.
Well, and I thought it was amazing, and a very, very strong piece. And I wrote something this summer about grief at work in my Substack, which is the Consigliere Papers, and kind of how to deal with grief at work, because I think people do it really badly. But one of the things that I wanted to start with is my mother died 2 years ago, and we were also estranged. And you don't hear a lot of social conversation or kind of cultural understanding of first what it is like to be estranged from a parent, and second, what happens when that estranged parent is the one who dies, right? And so for me, I had people my whole life would say to me, my whole life, my adult life when I was estranged from my mom, they would say, well, what if she was on her deathbed? Would you go see her? And I was like how does that change all of the reasons that I don't, choose to stay with her? And I read something, I can't even remember where it was, but somebody saying that being estranged from a parent is not a decision that anyone makes lightly.
Yep.
It's difficult. And it's difficult in our culture where there's so much, especially for your mother, your father. People can understand other sorts of family estrangements, but to really say, I choose not to have a relationship with a person who gave me life, that there's got to be something significant there. There's got to be some difficulty.
I will ask you this. When people tell me I'll meet friends, usually male friends, and I say, oh, how's Sally? And he goes, oh, Sally and I broke up. And I go, who dumped who? It's not a genteel way to frame it, and if the guy pauses, if he goes, I go, oh yeah, she dumped you. If he answers right away, well, I had to make some adjustments, then I figure he initiated this. It's weird with parents, right? Because I think your agency, when you say, you know what, enough, is different than maybe, I'd like to imagine maybe it's different from me with the phone just stopped ringing. I spoke to him in July. It's a little bit of a weird conversation. I said, I'm heading back to California now. So I'll be there, I'll be there for my birthday. So just FYI. He's like, okay. And on my birthday, where it's customary to get a call from a parent, no call. I go, that's weird. Maybe I'll get a call this Thanksgiving. No call for Thanksgiving. Maybe I'll get a call for Christmas. No call for Christmas. I'm like, okay, well, you want to play it that way? Don't know what's done, not concerned, but I've never tried to talk my way out of being dumped. Okay. And that's been my response. So I don't know how it varies from, I imagine it would feel better to have some agency about it. But I've had enough of you, you're out, but who knows? But
I think that there's, because in my circumstance, I felt like there was agency and that I was the one actually making the call.
Right.
But there was an agency in the reason that I made the call. Right. So for example, my mother never treated me well. I don't think my mother ever really liked me. She certainly never understood me. And so that caused her to interact with me in ways that were very unskillful.
Right.
And so the genesis of it was her disconnection from me for whatever reason, right? Her disconnection from me, which was ultimately so painful that I had to say, that's enough. Right. But I think that wherever it comes from, it's painful. And I think what's interesting to me is, how many people tried to talk me out of it. Right. Well, she did the best she could with what she had. I'm like, actually, no, she demonstrably that was not what happened. Or, somehow assumed, especially when I was younger, it's like, well, when you mature, you'll understand. When you have children of your own, you'll understand. And
I had to deal with a lot of that Hallmark card after school specialing, which is why I made reference to it twice in the Substack, because it was like, well, I'm glad that worked for you, but I'm telling you, the rightest path I've chosen is the one I've chosen for this. Believe me.
Well, and also the idea that I know how she treated me. I'm not trying to expose my children to that behavior.
100%. Exactly. And your heart hardens on the occasion of in my case, the birth of my first child. I was like, no way. No way. Not only if he felt a tenth about me the way I feel about this kid, he wouldn't have done what he had done. Moreover, I'm not subjecting her to it. Not at all.
Yep.
Not at all. Yep.
And I had a very similar experience when people had said, well, you don't understand when you have kids. I had a kid and I'm like, now I understand. It is inconceivable to me that anyone who had felt like this for 5 minutes about a child could then, But I think what's difficult, to go back to the grief at work thing, is that, you mentioned a Hallmark movie, right? That there's a cultural understanding of what the grief experience looks like that bears very little reality to the grief experience as it certainly lived by me and most of the people that I know. And there's this idea that you are sad. You are very, very sad. And often grief doesn't come out as sadness. For me, there was a lot of anger. And I was exhausted and it was really hard to sort of focus. And, when I remember when my dad died, I was 19, and my dad and I were close, and it was just devastating to me. And he had been sick for a long time, so it wasn't exactly a surprise, but still, I'm 19, right? And my mom took a lot of Valium and lay on the couch, and so I was arranging the funeral and talking to the lawyers and doing the stuff that I was totally not equipped to do. And I remember going at the funeral where my dad was buried. The undertaker was a friend of the family's who I had never met, but he was like, friends of, at this point, there were other adults around helping. And I looked at his shoes, and he was wearing really shiny patent leather shoes. And something about that set me off. And so instead of dealing with, I am now, we are burying my father, I became enraged at this man. And, he was a very sweet guy. And I don't remember what I said, but it was full on. It was me really, really angry. And I remember we were kind of stepped aside from the gravesite. I don't remember what I said. And he was very kind and generous about it. But, I've seen that happen for me, and that happened for other people. There's this sudden rage. What?
Did you give him a hard time about his shoes? Was that the locus point of the anger, or was it just something else?
I honestly don't remember anything that I said, but I do remember bringing in the shoes as a sort of failed coup de grace, like, and you're wearing patent leather shoes.
I got you.
It was not good. But I think one of the challenges is that if, to bring it back to like grief at work, like if you are working with people or being managed by people who have an understanding that grief is going to be sadness that lasts for the duration of your bereavement leave, which is usually 7 days, and maybe a few days afterwards, then the person who has had grief, who is experiencing grief, is going to really probably struggle in that. And so, what I would invite people to do who are working with someone who is grieving is to let go of any hallmark notions that you have about what grief looks like, right? And if there is anger, if there's rage, if there's the confusion, if there's a lack of perspective, be mindful of that. And also let go of this notion that it is a short duration. Right. And it's never like one of the things that I have learned, because I lost my dad when I was 19. And I lost my son when he was 19. And those are pretty significant. Lose a parent young. And then, of course, losing a child is, always horrible. But what I realized is people would say to me, I would always ask when they had lost someone. And I'd be like, when did he die? And they'd say 2 years. And I'd be like, oh, so it just happened. And there would be this, every single bereaved person I've ever talked to where I've said that, there's been this just moment of relaxation. Like, thank God, somebody who understands, because it's, especially if you're talking about someone who's in your immediate family, right? Your spouse, if you're close to family members, siblings, parents, and certainly children. That's one of the first things, is that time becomes a different thing. And the American cultural clock on grief is really, I would say it's about 3 months. Don't you think?
Yeah. To match your maternity and paternity leave, which 3 months is a long maternity leave, by the way. They give you typically 6 weeks of ridiculousness. But here I got one for you. This is sort of unfair to say, so I'm gonna scatter my tracks so it's not incredibly clear who it is that I'm talking about by way of boss. But I believe there's a possibility I may have had I'm qualifying it because I don't want to be a complete ass about this. But I think there was a boss who had weaponized the passing of a parent to be an even worse boss. And it was particularly tough for me because in this instance, the parent that died, in a weird turn of events, the boss's parent that had passed was somebody I'd gotten close to. So it was weird to watch him in the workplace kind of weaponize this as an excuse for why he was being a horrible boss. And in actual fact, me trying to reconcile that with the fact that the parent that had passed was a really wonderful human being who had generated a monster. So it was a weird workplace pas de deux with me and this boss. Again, was not interested in trying to qualify or understand the nature of how he approached grief, but I felt it to be somewhat disingenuous.
That's interesting. So how do you weaponize? Tell me more about without, protecting anonymity, what kind of things does a person who is weaponizing grief do?
Acting out in a way that was in keeping with how they had acted out, but was sans any real attempt to control it. So if I'm angry with you and I'm like, listen, I just need you, let's talk about this later. Okay, that's within the purview of what it is I've understood you to be like as a boss. But if you add to that, I am sick of your bullshit. Get out of my office right now. We'll talk about this later. I swear to God, I'm going to hit you with something. Okay. There's a line that was crossed, and they both occur under the shadow, the penumbra of this loss of a parent. But there's a big difference between one and the other.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point, because one of the things that in this Substack that I did last summer, I was talking about things that people at work who are well-intentioned can do to support somebody who's had a loss. I think as a grieving person, I went back to work a week or so after my son died, because he'd been, having a lot of medical issues for a couple of years, and I needed the money, right?
Yep.
And I went back to work, and I felt like it was incumbent upon me to try to be as professional as I could.
Yep.
Right. And I do think that we have that responsibility, right? Unfortunately, a lot of people need to go right back to work. They can't afford to, they don't have bereavement leave. They have medical bills from, if their loved one has been ill or they've taken time off of work. And so I do think it is incumbent upon those of us who are grieving to go back to work and to try to be as professional as we can. Take breaks if you need to, take a walk around the block. A friend of mine whose teenage daughter died soon before my son did. He kind of gave me the bereaved parent 101, and he was an attorney. And he said, learn how to cry in the car.
Yeah, right.
And he would do car cries where he would be going from, meeting with a client, going to court, and he would cry in the car and try to get it out of his system. And, the idea of trying to manage your grief as well as you can, I do think is something, because you're right. That's an interesting point. People can weaponize grief. And so, you don't want to be that person. But I guess I feel like I've seen very few people weaponize grief, and I've seen so many people just be unskillful to the grieving.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. But I see what you're saying. Yep.
And I guess a couple of other suggestions is, just to go back to what I was just saying, to be mindful that with the healthcare system in this country, even people with insurance, in fact, for years, the majority of people who declare bankruptcy because of medical bills have insurance.
Yeah.
Right? So people would say things like, well, why don't you take more time off? I can't afford to, right? And so recognizing, and I think just being really careful about what you say to someone who has had a loss, right? One of my least favorite things is something that people who purport to be spiritual say, which is something about God has a plan, he's in a better place, those kinds of things. And I happen to be a spiritual person. Keep that stuff to yourself. That is not helpful. Right? That's not helpful. If you don't know what to say to somebody who's just lost somebody, say that. I don't know what to say. What can I do to support you?
In my response to that, all I need to think, if I want a filmic, cinematic take on that, the first 5 minutes of Bram Stoker's Dracula, Francis Ford Coppola's version of it, when Gary Oldman as Dracula gets back and finds out the love of his life has committed suicide and he wants to bury her, and the priest goes, well, can't bury her here. She's, an apostate. She's a suicide. We can't, this is God opposes her. And Oldman as Dracula goes, you mean the God I was just fighting for? That guy? And then he repudiates God in total. And so I always think of that scene where people, it's God's way, or thoughts and prayers and stuff like that. I say, yeah, that's not helpful. Yeah.
It is not helpful to people who believe or don't believe. That's not
exactly.
Helpful. And then I think, another thing is, I talk sometimes about people who are professionally aggrieved, and it does seem like there's a lot of short fuses in the workplace, and there's a lot of judgment about how people grieve. And one of the really challenging areas where I've seen it is people who have pregnancy loss.
Oh, yeah.
And so the response often to someone who has lost a pregnancy or had a stillbirth or something like that is to just be like, oh, you can have another kid, to really diminish it, right? To not fully acknowledge that, like, we don't know what that experience is for that particular person, right? She may have been trying to do IVF for 10 years.
Yeah, right.
And this is the last try that she and her partner can afford. And she just had a miscarriage at 5 months. You don't know. And I think trying to be mindful, if an elderly parent who's been ill dies, well, it's a relief that he doesn't have to suffer anymore. Just try to not judge, or if you are judging, do it outside of the workplace.
Right. Correct. No ham-handed.
Yeah. And then I think the other one that's particularly horrible is people who try to do kind of like one-upsmanship, that sort of narcissism, like, oh, well, when my parent died, it's like, it's okay if something isn't about you. You can make space for a particular person to have whatever their experience might be.
Well, it's interesting, and the undercurrent that I'm getting through this, and I'm starting to, of course, reference it to my personal experience, and the undercurrent that goes through this is that generally, I've maintained like a church and state distinction between personal and professional. People I work with largely have had no idea about, is he married? Is he going through a divorce? When did he go through that stuff? It's not going to get me a raise, and therefore the field to play for it is not the workplace. I'm not trying to, but that goes back to the CEO who told me, Eugene, I'm leaving this company, but if you want to succeed at the company I'm leaving, I have one piece of advice for you. Talk to your workmates. And I was like, yeah, I do talk to them. She goes, not the way you talk to them, which is like, you need something, you talk to them, then you go back to, I said, I'm one guy. I got a staff of 6 people, put out a magazine. I can't be hanging around the water cooler. She goes, you should make time for it. I go, yeah. So, the opportunities for me to get personal have been few and far between. I mean,
but I think, that's interesting because I've generally been the same way. I mean, not maybe to that extreme, but I'm selective, right? Yeah, and part of the reason that I'm selective is that, like, it's not always safe to be talking about what is going on in your life, right? I mean, I was young when I had kids, and I was working as a single mom with 2 little kids, and none of the women that I work with had even had kids, right? Or they had infants, right? And so to say I have to leave and take somebody to the orthodontist, to the orthodontist, or I need to be at a T-ball was like, wait, don't you have a husband? Oh, and so there was a reason why I started to play the personal things kind of close to the vest. And that might be a generational thing, but it's interesting how many people are chastised now for that same thing. Like, you need to be more vulnerable at work. You need to be more authentic, which a lot of times is read as, and particularly for people who are older, like, what makes you think it's safe for me to be authentic at work?
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. Yeah.
And so I think it's that idea of, what I would suggest is respect what it is that people have made a choice to do, right? And that my desire to not say every single thing that's going on in my personal life doesn't mean that I don't want to be friendly with the people that I work with, that I'm not, but it's not, let's not make letting it all hang out, talking about every single thing become the litmus test of authenticity at work.
Right. No, I generally try to be convivial. I mean, I learned this from dealing with mafia guys and bad actors, very tough. What they want to see when they look across the room, they just want to see a guy who's, there's one mobster that I used to deal with. This guy loved me. And he amused me. So every time I saw him, I was kind of like, 1, really happy to see him. And 2, he just amused me. So he looks over and he sees this fairly, genial presence. And I remember him saying at one point to people in the room that he had terrified, I love this guy. I'm like, well, I'm glad that he loves me. I'm sure he's done really terrible things in his life, but he's just cracking me up. So, I mean, that's was me. My role in the workplace. I just tried to be because they don't know you. They don't know I'm a blabbermouth. They don't know that I could just kind of be kind of a quiet guy and kind of smile and a general genial presence. I think that got me through. Of course, the internet makes it difficult to maintain that facade. When people, is this you choking somebody? I go, well, yeah, he had it coming. But
there's an agency with that too.
Correct.
I mean, you and I will write about things that are personal, but there's a whole bunch of stuff I never talk about. Right? Yeah, right. And I get to choose. Right. And I think, particularly like Roxane Gay has talked about this idea that, someone who chooses, an artist who chooses to make art that references their trauma or to take traumatic experiences and somehow incorporate them, that doesn't mean that you get to know every other thing or that you get to have access to that on demand. And I think it's the same. I think it's the same way. There may be people who have, who lose a loved one who don't choose to talk about it, who don't want to make a big deal. And I think the other thing that you did that was very skillful was you've said in spoken conversations as well as in your writing, this happened. I don't need condolences. Really.
You're right.
You are naming what it is that you need. Right. Yep. And I remember right after my son died and I went right back to work, I was talking to a woman who I really respect, an older woman. And she said, I'm sorry for your loss. And I was like, let's not talk about it. And she said, Stephanie, you have to let people at least say that.
Yep.
And I was like, okay. But that's all that they get to say. Right. Otherwise I get to have some sense of kind of choice or agency. So do you have a fire me, or since we're just rolling, should we just roll?
I do have, it's not a fire me proper, but it's a fire. It is. There are two. And one is fire me adjacent, and one is fire me. I have been on cloud number 9, if that's the aphorism here, or either because what happened. I mean, if you're not into combat sports, this is all occult to you. But on Saturday night, Francis Ngannou, a Cameroonian, a combat athlete, who used to work in salt mines and illegally immigrated to France, was sleeping in dumpsters through French winters in order to nurse this idea of being a combat athlete, eventually got to the Ultimate Fighting Championship, where he became the heavyweight champion of the world, tried to negotiate a better deal with Dana White, the CEO and friend of Donald Trump, who then began denigrating this guy's efforts and fundamentally set him free, right? Just said, go, 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 and began this kind of campaign of personal attack, diminishing this guy's accomplishments. The guy won the UFC heavyweight championship with a busted knee because he knew he would not be shown any favors on his exit. And his goal was, I want to box. And he got a partner in the heavyweight champion of the world, Tyson Fury. And they fought this weekend. He lost by a very close decision, but in the third round, he knocked down Tyson Fury. In boxing, they give you a 10 count. Now, the boxing world, without a glimmer of, there was no joking when they said what I'm about to say that they said. They described what happened Saturday night as boxing's 9/11. Like, they are completely beside themselves and upset that this guy who had a record of 0-0 came in and knocked out the lineal heavyweight champion of the world, right? Knocked him down, didn't knock him out the third round. And the best part about this is that everybody now has swung back around to Dana White, who didn't make the decision to make this deal. Now, Dana White who works now for Ari Emanuel, the head of Endeavor, which used to be William Morris. Ari Emanuel just bought WWE, which is Worldwide Wrestling Entertainment. And Dana White is subordinate to Vince McMahon. And we've been able to see a steadfast record of failure over the past 10 months. Not only did he bobble this fight that made at least 65 million euros for Tyson Fury, and probably very close to that for Francis Ngannou, but all of the ancillaries, as well as now this guy's a legitimate boxer. I mean, the UFC has lost this past weekend millions upon millions and millions of dollars, as well as future opportunities, as well as the main fight that they were going to anchor the end of the year numbers to was John Jones and Stipe Miocic. And that fight, because of an injury, is off. So it's like Peter Principle in action. The guy he's only had the appearance of making right decisions. I know a little bit more. So it's wonderful in the spirit of Fire Me to see this kind of comeuppance, right? I mean, it's like Horatio Alger's story, any story that you want to reference, to have somebody blow it that big and that majorly. And the guy who's never seen a microphone that he doesn't like has been eerily silent since Saturday night. So that's a wonderful. The other one is situational. And that's, we've seen, like, I'm ensconced here between Meta, Google, Amazon over here, and Salesforce up this way. They've been really adept at terrifying their workers into going back, right? Roblox recently said, if you do not return to your desk by spring of 2024, you will no longer have a job at Roblox. Of course, they've sowed discord and confusion because they haven't said who, because some people still get the old system of working from home, but some have to come back to the desk. Unclear how that's going to play out. So the real story of this is on the roads, you can tell. And I've been able to track based on my comings and goings. And I think people are responding. They are returning to the office. But rush hour now starts here at 2:33, which means I spy with my little eye, people are cutting side deals and pushing for flex time. I'm basing this, my day begins at 6 a.m. with jujitsu. But I know when I'm looking at 2:30 traffic jams that these are people on flex time. They're leaving work because they've been at work since 6 o'clock, 6:30 in the morning. And I see them going to jujitsu, and I see them when I'm doing other stuff during the day. So it's interesting that these companies think that they've effectively scared people back to work. People are fighting tooth and nail for what they got during the shutdown. And what they got during the shutdown was some proof that flexibility works. The job was getting done. You don't need to see me sitting there at that desk unless it's some kind of hand on the rock control thing. So these are two, like I said, one was a Fire Me proper and one's Fire Me adjacent. So that's all I got.
Which is interesting. All right. Well, that's what we've got time for. If you have any questions or suggestions or things you would like us to cover on Sub Rosa, which is our little advice podcast, get in touch at WTF@badbossbrief.com. That's WTF@badbossbrief.com. Talk soon. Thanks.
Adios.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Bad Boss Brief podcast with your hosts, Eugene S. Robinson and Stephanie Peirolo. You can check out more of their work by visiting consigliera.substack.com for Stephanie and eugenesrobinson.substack.com for Eugene. You can also find Eugene at Mr. Sleep 3, that's number 3, on Instagram. Reach out with your questions, concerns, work case situations, or suggestions to us at WTF@badbossbrief.com. We personally answer every submission. Be sure to join us at badbossbrief.substack.com every other Wednesday for episodes of Bad Boss Brief and every single week for our Sub Rosa shorts, so you can gain further insights into your workplace environments. Until next time, don't be an asshole at work.